Hello, I think everything is up. So today I am going to be starting a sculpture based on different tooth fairy legends. I settled on the Spanish and Hispanic legends of having a little tooth fairy mouse. He's typically called Raton Perez or Ratoncito Perez, which is what I named this. So I do apologize if I'm speaking a little softer than usual. I am using my actual tooth for this sculpture because I had a tooth extracted last week and I'm still a little bit on the recovery side. So, mouth is a little bit sore still. But I should be okay to keep talking. I was able to talk quite a bit today at work, so I should be fine. But as you can see, actual tooth. I was really shocked when they offered to give it to me. They're like, "Oh, do you want it?" And I was like, yeah. And since I had to suffer for it, I figure I might as well turn it into something useful. And you can see it is a little damaged, but and the roots are fused, which is kind of weird. But yeah, he was asking me if I wanted to keep it, and I was like, yeah, I'll take it. I want to keep it. I almost didn't get it. I had to go grab it off the tray, and then they're like, oh, wait, we'll give you a box for it. So I decided, you know what, since I've been dealing with so much tooth-related things, I will turn my suffering into art, and we'll make a sculpture with this. So we're going to be doing Ratoncito Perez, if I can talk today, which is basically the Tooth Fairy, but it's a little mouse. He doesn't necessarily leave you coins like the Tooth Fairy always does. He might leave you a gift, but it's the same general idea. And this particular creature existed, I think, in other folk tales, but the whole Tooth Fairy thing kind of developed out of a specific story written for a prince. Let me pull up his name here. I believe it was Alfonso the 13th. In 1894, it was written by Luis Colomo, or Louis Colomo. And he was writing a story for the 8-year-old prince, Alfonso the 13th, who was nicknamed Booby, which is important because we're going to read the story of El Raton Perez, written by Colomo. I did put in the description the Project Gutenberg version of it. It's got all the artwork in it too, which is really cool. This is, I think it was the 19, I'm not sure which one. We're reading the translated one. I did find the Spanish one, but I don't trust my translating skills that much, and so we're reading the English translation. Plus, I don't think I could try to translate and sculpt at the same time. But I'm going to set this up here. So there's different tooth fairy legends. The ones in the West are kind of all over the place. I did see some cool stuff about like Asian traditions with teeth where you would take them out and throw them up in the air if they were upper teeth or down in the air if they were bottom teeth, and that would make the teeth come in straight. There's other like fairy legends about, oh, don't let the fairies take any part of you because they can claim you. But the actual idea of a fairy that exchanges teeth for money seems to develop later, and I couldn't find a bunch of clear information on where that came from in the West, and portrayals of the Tooth Fairy in like America kind of are all over the place. We typically have like a little Tinkerbell fairy kind of thing. Most drawings now that I've seen, but I didn't see as clear a development as I did with the Spanish one. And I like doing little mice, so I settled on the Spanish one. And I'm going to, let's see, yeah, you can't see, okay. I'm going to try to read and sculpt at the same time. We'll see if I can accomplish this. All right. So this is the story of Perez the mouse. And it is important to know that raton and ratoncito is like a little mouse. It's not rat, it's mouse. I don't actually know what the word for rat is in Spanish. I'll have to look that up in a second here. I'm not picking my phone up again because I just put it over here. All right. Once upon a time, there lived a king called Booby, which is Alfonso the 13th. That was his nickname. The first, who was very kind to poor children and mice. For the children, he built a factory for making dolls and cardboard horses. For the benefit of the mice, he made a wise laws to stop cats catching them all, and absolutely forbade the use of mousetraps. Booby began to reign when he was only 6 years old under the care of his mother, who was very good and clever, and who watched over him and guided his steps as good children are guided by their guardian angel. Booby was a darling little boy, and when on great days they put on his gold crown and his embroidered robes, the gold of his crown was not brighter than his hair, nor the ermine of his robes softer than his cheeks and hands. He was just like a little Dresden china figure, which had been put to sit on the throne instead of standing on a chimney-piece. So apparently he had gold hair. That's interesting. All right. One day, while the king was eating his bread and milk, one of his teeth began to wobble. There was a great fuss about the court. There was a great fuss, and the court doctors arrived in a hurry. They were all agreed that His Majesty had begun to change his teeth, and at length they settled to pull out the loose one. They wanted the king to have laughing gas as he did. Sorry, I misread that. They wanted the king to have laughing gas as he did when his hair was cut, and he always fidgeted so. But Booby was a brave little boy and made up his mind to have it out with nothing. The oldest of the court doctors tied a bit of red silk around the tooth and then gave it a tweak. And he pulled so cleverly that while the king was making a face, out came the tooth, and round and white as a little pearl. I'm assuming this story was commissioned after he lost a tooth, because it would be kind of a strange thing, I think, to do otherwise. Then there was another fuss as to what was to be done with it, but Booby's mother, who, as we have said, was very wise, sorry, I misread that too. I need to pull this closer. I'm going to read everything incorrect. Let's try it here. Yes, I can see it much better here. All right, this will be better. Who was a very wise queen and very loyal to old customs, settled that the king should write a very polite letter and put it with the tooth in an envelope under his pillow that night, which has always been the proper thing to do ever since the world began, and no one has ever known Perez the mouse to forget to come and fetch the tooth and leave a lovely present in its place. So apparently this legend of the mouse existed beforehand, but the actual tooth part, I think Coloma added or changed. Because I think that's what the wiki said when I was reading over it. Now, I do have some other articles and stuff we'll be reading hopefully next time. I didn't get to be as prepared for this as I wanted to be because I had a lot of work to do at my actual job. But, alright, let's look at the next section. King Booby found writing that letter a dreadful task, but he managed really quite well in the end, and only inked all his fingers, the tip of his nose, his left ear, his right shoe, and his bib. He went to bed very early that evening and ordered that all the light should be left in his room. He put the envelope under his pillow and sat up in bed, determined to keep awake to see Perez the mouse, even if he had to wait all night. All right. I apologize if I keep pausing. I kind of have to actually pay attention to what I'm doing with my hands and also try to read. It's a little hard to multitask this, but not too terrible. Alright. Phone fell over. I apologize for all the weird noises here. I'm trying to get my phone to stay propped up so that I can actually read this. Alright. Perez the mouse was a long time coming, so the little king began to make up a little speech to say to him when he did arrive. After a bit, Booby began to open his eyes very wide, fighting against the miller who was trying to make him shut them. Fighting against the miller who was trying to make him shut them. What? I don't understand that. Fighting against the... Isn't a miller someone who grinds wheat? Is that like another legend that I'm unaware of? Alright, that's another thing to look up after we finish reading this. And the little boy, at last, slipped down into the warm bedclothes, his head on the pillow, with one arm over it, as a little bird tucks its head under its wing when it goes to sleep. Suddenly, he felt something very soft, just tickling his forehead. And, sitting up quickly, he saw in front of him, standing on the pillow, A tiny little mouse in a straw hat and slippers and big gold spectacles, a red satchel slung across his back. So the key descriptions we have here for our little mouse sculpture is that he must have glasses. Now, I may not be able to make them gold, but I do have silver wire, so we'll give him glasses and a straw hat and a red satchel. So that's our main descriptor of Mr. Perez. Alright, let's see, his eyeball should be here and here. Once I get his eyes in here, we'll go back to reading in a second. All right. King Booby started at him in astonishment, and Perez the mouse, seeing that his majesty was awake, took off his hat and made a very low bow, wanting to be spoken to. But the king said nothing, because he had quite forgotten all that he had made up to say, and after thinking and thinking, he faltered out at last, "Good night." Perez answered with a low bow, "God give your majesty a very good one." These civil speeches quite broke the ice, and the king and the mouse became the greatest friends. It was easy to see that Perez was a mouse who was accustomed to polite society, and to run about on soft carpets, as he had such very good manners. It was wonderful what a lot of things he could talk about, and which made him a very pleasant companion. He had traveled through all the pipes and drains of the capital, and in the royal library alone he had eaten up 3 books in less than a week. I don't like him. He eats books. Don't eat books. I like books. Let's see. He talked, too, about his family. He had 2 quite grown-up daughters, Adelaide and Elvira, and a son, nearly grown up, called Adolphus, who was studying for diplomacy in the drawer where the Minister of State kept most of his secret notes. He did not say much about Mrs. Mouse, and the king somehow fancied that she was rather vulgar. I'm assuming that means, rather, not high-born, not, vulgar like nowadays means. Because this book was translated early 1900s. His Majesty listened to all this with his mouth open, from the time he put his hand to try to catch Perez by the tail, but each time the mouse gave a sort of whisk and placed his tail out of reach without being, at least, in the least bit rude. There's also beautiful illustrations in this. If you want to look at the Project Gutenberg link that I put in the description, they have all of the illustrations that were used in this particular translated version, and they're quite nice. I can't tell. They look kind of like the old print sketch type stuff with color, but they're very nice. All right. It was getting late, and the king forgot to dismiss him, so Mr. Mouse cleverly hinted that he had to go the same night to a street not far off to fetch a tooth of a very poor little boy called Giles. It was rather a difficult and dangerous journey, because near there lived a very wicked cat called Don Pedro, and the king at once wanted to go too and begged Perez to take him with him. The mouse stood thinking it over and twisting his whiskers. The responsibility was very great, and moreover he was obliged to go back to his own house to fetch the present for little Giles. The king said he would very much like to go and see the mouse's home, which so much flattered Perez that he at once offered him a cup of tea and agreed to take him to see little Giles. Perez the mouse lived under the grocer's shop, beneath near a big pile of Gruyere cheeses, which supplied the whole family with breakfast, dinner, and tea. Overjoyed, King Booby jumped out of bed and began to dress himself, when all at once Perez the Mouse sprang upon his shoulder, put the tip of his tail into His Majesty's nose. Then a wonderful thing happened. The king sneezed very hard and turned into the most darling little mouse you ever saw. He was all soft and shiny and had wee green eyes like emeralds. Perez the Mouse took him by the paw and disappeared with him down a tiny hole under the bed, which had been hidden by the carpet. All right. Let me finish making the eyes here. Let's put better lids on them here. One of the things that happens a lot of times when I add lids to like a sculpture is that things get a very angular eye. And that's fine, that's more realistic, but in this case I want him to look more cute, so I often will round it out a bit. Because the rounder the eyes are, the more babyish and cute things look. I don't know why, but that's just kind of how it is sometimes. And you'd be surprised, like the tiniest little changes in eyelid shape and eyebrows. It's like where all the emotions are expressed, and it makes a drastic difference in the way the sculpture looks. I'm not the best at expressions. Actually really struggle sometimes to understand what they're supposed to look like. But sculpting faces and things will really teach you a lot about that. Because you'll begin to notice the tiniest little changes make drastic differences in the way something looks. All right. Okay, now let's go back to our story. Now they just ran down a hole that was under the back of the carpet that apparently, presumably, Mr. Perez came through. The way was dark and sticky, but they scampered along. Sometimes Perez the Mouse stopped at some crossway and looked about before going on, which rather frightened the king and made him feel little shivers right down to the tip of his tail. And he knew that he was afraid, but he remembered that fear is natural to the prudent. To conquer is to be courageous. So he would not let himself be frightened, which is being really brave. Once he heard a tremendous noise, like dozens of motor omnibuses passing over his head. He whispered to ask Perez if that was where Don Pedro lived, but Mr. Mouse said no with his tail, and on they went. All right. My cat's crying at the door now. Oh. Almost perfectly on cue, but that's not where Don Pedro lives, so we don't need the cat noises yet. Alright. I think we should give him some little cheeks here, make him look a little cuter. Alright, after going down a gentle slope, they came to a big cellar, which felt nice and warm and smelled very much of cheese. Behind a pile of Gruyere cheese. I'm assuming that's how you say that. I really don't know. I'm not very up on cheese types. So we're pronouncing it Gruyere for now because I have no idea how to say that word. They found themselves face to face with the Huntley and Palmer biscuit tin, which was the home of Perez and his family. Here they lived as happily as the rat of the fable did and the Dutch cheese. Perez the mouse introduced the king as a foreign tourist who was on a visit to the capital, and the family welcomed him very cordially. The two Miss Mouses were at work with their governess, Miss Stilton, who was a very learned English mouse, and Mrs. Mouse was embroidering a beautiful smoking cap for her husband, sitting by a bright fire made by raisin stalks. This happy family party delighted King Booby. Adelaide and Elvira made tea and poured out some into lovely wee cups made out of the skins of white beans. They had a little music. Adelaide sang Desdemona's song, "Oh, Willow, Willow," in a way which very much pleased the king, and Elvira recited about a little mouse who was ill of fever, and a naughty kitten who wanted to pounce on it. After this, Adolphus came from the Jockey Club, where, to the sorrow of his father and mother, he had wasted all his time playing cards with the mice from foreign embassies. King Booby would willingly have stayed longer, but Perez, who had slipped away, came back with his satchel on his back and said it was time to start. So the king said goodbye very politely, and Mrs. Mouse gave him a kiss on each cheek in her homely way. Adelaide put out a paw in a lackadaisical fashion, and Elvira shook hands like a pump handle, while Miss Stilton made him a beautiful cheese of a curtsy, and then stared at him through her eyeglasses until he was out of sight. Adolphus, too, was very gushing, and conducted him as far as the lid of the tin, offered to introduce him to the polo club, for which the king thanked him very much, thinking all the time that, though he might be a very smart young mouse, he was rather a bore. Then Booby and Perez the mouse began their scamper with such a quantity of precautions that the king was astonished. In front of them went a regiment of ferocious mice, soldiers who I can't talk today, I apologize. In front of them went a regiment of ferocious mice, soldiers whose bayonets, made of fine needles, gleamed in the darkness. Behind them came a second regiment, also armed to the teeth. Perez the mouse then confessed that he would not have undertaken this expedition without these soldiers to protect the person of the young monarch. All of a sudden, King Booby saw the guard in the front had disappeared down a little hole, through which came a faint light. All right, let me finish up the cheeks here on this, and then we'll go back to our story. I don't quite have this blended properly. We gotta fix it a little bit. Oh. Let me blend. This is a little too sharp of a contrast. We need to blend it in here more. There we go. He's gonna look cute with his glasses. All right. Now, there isn't a whole lot of description of clothing, so I'm a little bit, I guess, free to my own interpretation. The book translation that I posted in the thumbnail has one image of him being in a smoking jacket, but it doesn't have the hat. The older versions seem to put him almost like in a little doublet or something, and then some of the more modern give him like a little jacket. I think I'm gonna go with vest, because I like vests. So I think we might give him a little red vest. The important thing is he has a straw hat, glasses, and a satchel. Other than that, we're kind of left to our own on description. It didn't say he had green eyes, but the king's mouse had green eyes, and green eyes are just the ones that I happen to have enough of to do for the sculpture, so in the right size, because I have a ton of little eyeballs that I use, but sometimes hard to find the color you want in the size you want. All right. Go. Got the vast majority of the head done here. Okay. This was the moment of danger. Perez the mouse, slowly waggling his tail from side to side, put his head very cautiously through a hole and looked around. He then went back 2 steps and finally, suddenly seizing the king's paw, dashed through the hole like an arrow, crossed a big kitchen, disappeared through another hole on the opposite side near the range. As one sees a telegraph post out of the train, so Booby saw the kitchen. By the hearth, in the glow of the fire, lay an enormous cat, the dreadful Don Pedro, with his great whiskers heaving up and down as it breathed. The guards silently formed up from hole to hole, ready to fire to protect the king's route from the sleeping cat. It was all very grand and imposing. An ugly old woman sat in the chair, also asleep, with her knitting on her knee. Once they were through the hole, the danger was over, and they had all only to get upstairs, as this was where little Giles lived. Everything was open in his poor room, which was all cracks and draughts. King Booby scrambled onto the arm of the seatless chair, the only one in the room, and from there could see the picture of poverty such as he had never dreamt of. The sloping roof joined the floor, so that on one side a man could not have stood upright, and the holes in the cold air of the dawn was coming, while icicles hung from the roof. The only furniture besides the chair was an empty bread basket hanging up, and in the corner a bed of straw and rags on which little Giles and his mother were lying fast asleep. Perez the mouse drew nearer, taking the king by the paw, and they could see how little Giles was huddled up in the rags and how he was cuddled up against his mother for warmth, and it made the king so unhappy that he began to cry. Why had he never known that people were so poor? How was it that he had never been told that children were hungry and had to sleep on horrid beds? He did not want any blankets on his cot till every child in the kingdom had plenty of bedclothes to keep warm. Perez the mouse brushed away a tear with his paw, and then tried to comfort the king by showing him the bright gold coin that he was going to put under little Giles' pillow in exchange for his first tooth. Then Giles' mother woke up and sat in bed and looked at her little boy who was still asleep. It was becoming light, and she had to earn some money by washing clothes in the river. She caught the sleeping Giles in her arms and made him kneel down under a picture of the infant Christ, which was pinned to a wall near the bed. The king and Perez the mouse knelt down too, and so did the soldier mice who were waiting in the empty bread basket. The child began to pray, "Our Father, which art in heaven." Booby started and looked at Perez the mouse, who understood his astonishment, and fixed his piercing eyes on him, but never said a single word. All right. And I gotta form the base here a little bit more sturdy so we can start adding legs here. And then we'll do the jacket and the arms. Or the vest. Sorry, I said I was gonna do a vest for him. Ugh. Okay. On the return journey, they were all silent and preoccupied. And half an hour later, the king was home in his nursery with Perez the mouse, who again put the tip of his tail onto Booby's nose and made him sneeze. All at once he found him safely back in his own warm little cot, with the queen's arms round him, who woke him, as she always did, with a kiss. At first he thought it all had been a dream, but when he looked for the letter he'd put under his pillow, he found it was gone, and in its place was a case with the Order of the Golden Fleece in diamonds, a magnificent present from the generous Perez the Mouse in exchange for his first tooth. Perhaps I had better, and this is a translator's note, explain to English children that in King Booby's country, the Order of the Golden Fleece is like the Order of our Garter, the greatest honor that the king can give. The little king, however, paid no attention to his beautiful present, and let it lie unnoticed on the bed, while leaning on his elbow he lay very busy thinking. Then suddenly he asked the queen in a very solemn voice, "Mamma, why do children say the same prayers I do, Our Father which art in heaven? Why do poor children say the same prayers I do, Our Father who art in heaven?" The queen answered, "Because he is as much their father as he is yours." Then the king said thoughtfully, "We must be brothers then." "Yes, my darling, they are your brothers," answered the queen. Booby's eyes were filled with astonishment, and in a choky voice he asked, "Then why am I a king and have everything I want, while they are poor and have nothing?" The queen gave him a squeeze, and kissing him again on his forehead, said, "Because you are the eldest brother, which is what being a king really means. You understand, darling, God has given you everything in order that your younger brothers should want for nothing." "I never knew this before," said Booby, shaking his head, without thinking any more about his present. He began to say his prayers as he did every morning, and as he prayed, it seemed to him that all the poor little boys in the kingdom came round him with their hands clasped, and he, as the eldest brother, spoke for them all when he prayed, "Our Father, which art in heaven." King Booby grew up to be a great ruler. He always asked for God's help in all he did, and returned thanks for his happiness, ever saying, speaking for all his subjects, poor and rich, good and bad, "Our Father, which art in heaven." And when he died a very old man, his good soul arrived at the gates of heaven, and he kneeled down and prayed as usual, "Our Father." And as he prayed, the gates were opened wide by thousands of poor little children to whom he had been king, that is to say, the eldest brother here on earth. All right. And here is a translator's note. The Spanish story, which was written once upon a time to amuse a real little boy king, ends here, but I cannot help adding to it that it does seem a pity not to try to get Perez the Mouse to come to England. The only way to manage this will be to take great pains over your copies and spelling, so that when your first tooth comes out, you will be able to write a nice, tidy, polite letter to him. If you put it under your pillow at night, I'm nearly sure you will find it gone and a present in its place the next morning. Perhaps you may even feel the same little soft tickle on your forehead as King Booby did. But I do not promise for that for certain, for you will see that the kind Mr. Mouse... But I do not promise for certain that you will see the kind Mr. Mouse, for he is rather shy. And that is the end of the story. I do find it interesting that Coloma took that avenue with the story, making it more about teaching the little boy to be, the responsibility of the kingdom that he was going to, presumably, inherit. I'm not sure how long the Spanish monarchy was in power. I actually know very little about the history of Spain, so I'm reticent to say too much about that, because I would probably be incorrect. But I thought it was a sweet little story, and one of the more fleshed out stories that I could have for sculpting some sort of mythological creature. But this legend, or similar legends, of a little mouse that takes teeth exist in most Spanish-speaking cultures. I don't know how common they are, because I'm kind of far removed from most of those cultures, but according to Wikipedia and the internet, most of them have some variation of this, much like our tooth theory. But Colomo's story that we just read was one of the things that sort of popularized the notion of Ratoncito Perez. So I thought it would be a fun little story to read. There are some more tooth fairy related stuff that I kind of want to go over next time, but I didn't have time to research as much as I wanted to. As always, I don't have time to do anything. So many things I want to accomplish that I don't have the time for. Alright, so I think I'm going to go ahead. Now, let me wrap another layer of clay on here. The problem with the reading is I don't get much sculpting done. Oh, here, let me move this so I can actually see. Yeah. And I would be curious to read what happened with Alfonso XIII and whether or not he lived up to Colomo's expectations. Coloma, or however you say his name. His expectations of him being a good king. I'd be curious if the story made an impact on him. That'd be very interesting. I will look that up and see if it's something we can talk about when we paint this little guy. I think that would be that, and then there was something with, there was an article that was talking about the Tooth Fairy legends that came from the 1900s in America. And I wanted to read over that, see if I could find the original source for it and read that. But I couldn't find a whole lot of cohesive stuff for Western Tooth Fairy legends. It was kind of all over the place, and portrayals of the Tooth Fairy are all over the place. The Spanish ones are pretty consistently a mouse. So, I mean, right now this little guy is more the size of a rat, but that's because the eyes I chose were that size. I could have chosen smaller ones, I suppose, but it would have been harder to sculpt, and I think this is a nice size for him. Even though he's more rat-sized than mouse-sized. Okay. Now I'm going to pull up some reference photos of mice, because I need that. And so they do have a little bit of a button nose kind of right there. And then let me see, how are the nostrils? The nostrils. The eyes are more rounded, so I need to fix that. We'll round these up a bit. A bit more. Okay. There we go. Alright, and then let me look at mouse nose. So their noses are kind of like that. And then they have little let's reshape this a little bit. More like that. And then we'll put little it's hard for me to sculpt animals purely from memory. They tend to look not quite right when I do that. So they have a little bit of like a little, not a cheek exactly, but a little pouch like around their nose that gives it that cute shape. And then a little bit here on this side. Now I'll have to see if there's something I can use for whiskers. I think I do have some fishing line and stuff, but that might be too weak. I think wires would be too noticeable, too thick. We'll see. especially since we're going to be using wire for the whatchamacallit, the glasses. So we may not be able to use wire for the whiskers as well. But worst case scenario, I think hot glue. I've done mouse sculptures before that I just didn't do their whiskers on, so I can also just not do them. But if I really need to, there we go. If I really need to, I can probably use like hot glue gun strands. Okay. And then, yeah, so then they tend to have a little mouth right here, which I will add. There we go. So we got his little face. I don't know why this camera keeps adjusting the lighting, because nothing in this room has changed in light. So I don't understand it. Anyway, so we have... because I like it when it's brighter white. There we go. Oh, it did it again. It went yellow again. Why is it like this? Okay, so that's our little face that we have so far. Let's see if we can give some quick little leg nubs here for a second, and then we'll do the vest and tail. And we'll go from there. That won't be too much longer. We'll be finished pretty quickly. Then I'll just have to figure out how the heck to make his glasses. I might just make them sit on the front of his face and not actually go around his ears, because the mouse ears are up here, so that wouldn't work. I mean, I guess we could sit them on top of his head. That might work. I had this issue earlier when I was drawing my little Bat bookseller and designs, which if you watch this video and you hear this part, please go vote on the poll or check out the short video and let me know which design you want, because I will be doing, after I finish this guy next week, I'll be doing a new animal sculpture, and I was hoping to get some input on what people wanted me to make. So let me know which design that I proposed that you liked the best. There's a fifth design, but the YouTube poll wouldn't let me post the capybara one, so I only got like 2 comments, but nobody mentioned. The capybara was the only one that wasn't ever mentioned as an option that people were interested in. So I didn't include him on the poll, but he is still an option. Okay. Okay. So I think we might have to give him pants in this sense because the mouse legs are going to be too skinny to actually hold up. So we're going to combat that by making, because we made his legs so much thicker, these are just going to be pants. So I'm going to do the little to make the cloth thing without completely wrapping the figure. We're just going to make a long strip here. We flatten it out and then we'll blend it in around the top, but we won't blend in the top. So I'll show you what I mean in a second. Is that enough to go all the way around? Not quite. So what you do, you take this, you flatten it out a bit. Okay. And then, yeah, put the, wherever you want the top of the, hold on, let me flatten out one edge a bit more. Okay. Then we're going to break it here, blend these together. We don't blend in this top edge piece, we just blend in the bottom one. So that it'll end up looking kind of like the edge of his pants. Of course, here we're going to have to do the tail, which that is one nice thing about creatures with tails. They do give you a nice way to balance them. Two-legged creatures and getting the figurines to balance is so difficult. You could do the old-fashioned style pants with like the button front. Just have to be careful it doesn't end up looking like Mickey Mouse overalls. We don't want to do that. It's not what I'm going for. Alright. Okay. Yeah, so they have like a little ledge here and here. Should probably, here, I'll roll out a... Okay. Alright, and then 4 buttons, so like one here, 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 and here. Kind of pull the fabric a little bit in different directions. Okay. Alright. There we go. Alright. We're gonna do his tail here real quick. I guess I should do his shoes. Or his, I could just give him little feet and then have the pants wrap around. Yeah, let me go ahead and do his feet and then we'll do mouse feet. Okay, so they're very long and thin with toes. So like this. Now we'll make them a little bigger than that. Okay. Alright, now we're gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 little toes. So, side toe, like a thumb toe. I don't think thumb toe is the right word. But it's not really a bigger toe, it's actually smaller. And then side toe. 1, 2, and 3. Alright, so now we're gonna blend these out a little bit here, make them look a little nicer. I usually separate them and then I'll squish them back together just because they are very fragile and likely to break. So, okay. Yeah, and then we'll do the cuffs of his pant legs around this. That way it looks a little better. Okay. Now let's give him his tail. Okay. The question is, should I have put a wire base in this? Well, he's not going to stand up on his own until he gets baked. That's fine. Should probably have put a wire base in this, but I don't want to. I didn't feel like it, so. It requires planning and preparation, and I was not in planning and preparation mode today at all. I have so much I need to get done. In my defense, I was like suffering from the whole tooth extraction thing, so I didn't have time. Well, I had time, but I didn't feel well. And I wasn't supposed to be doing a lot of stuff. I mean, I could have done this. I really could have done this. Planning ahead of time, but I did not feel too great. Up until about yesterday, or the day before. So. But yeah, hopefully putting my tooth in a sculpture will make me happier. I don't know that it will, but it made me happy thinking about it, which is kind of weird, but it made me happy, so I'm gonna do it. Okay. I'm gonna squish him down a little. So we're getting... Okay. Turn his toes to the side a tad, make his stance a little wider. Squish him down in the back. We will have to prop him up in the oven. I'm not going to have another little possum issue where it falls face forward and potentially ruins the sculpture. Okay, we're gonna stretch this piece out a bit. See if we can turn it into a vest for little Mr. Raton Perez. Not quite. Not quite. Let's lay him down so I'm not stressed about him falling over. A little more. Let's stretch it out a little more. Hi. Now, let me cut the upper part of this. Actually, let's not cut it, let's fold it down. And then fold it down. so. Dot there. All right. Okay, so now we've got. No, we do need to do the cuffs on his pants real quick here. And then we'll move to the arms and the ears. So I have not forgotten about the head. Okay. Okay, and we did the cuff of his pants there. I don't think this one's long enough. Stand up. Don't fall over. Okay. All right. Let's do a little vest coat pocket here. There we go. It's got a little vest pocket now. Okay. Now I do want to go ahead and give him a little bit of a collar all the way around the top of the vest. But we're gonna... I think we'll attach the arms under that. And that'll work pretty well. Alright. Okay. We got a vest here on him. Alright. So now I'm gonna do just the arm nubs at the moment, and then we'll add the hands after the fact. I just want to get the arm nubs on there. If I can call them arm nubs. I don't think I'm going to give him the satchel. I think I'm going to have him freestanding and just have his hand out. So I may need some wire for the one arm if we're going to do that. His arm should be fairly thin, I think. I guess I could make... let's do regular arm, no jackets. Yeah. I was thinking I could do sleeves just like I did with the pants, so I could make the arms a little thicker. Because that does make them a little more sturdy. But we'll just go with it. Yeah, okay. So this one will just be down, and then this one will be the one with the hand open. Alright, lift this up a bit. And I could make the arms thicker, but they really shouldn't be. Little mouse arms are so skinny and tiny. Okay. I'll make it a little bit shorter, but not much. And then we'll put the other one right there. And then this one will be the one outstretched with the tooth in the hand. Like that. Okay. So, that's what we have so far. Nope, nope. Give him... Okay, so he needs a straw hat. That's the next order of business. Now, the straw hat he had in the illustration was not the type that I was thinking of. It was like a taller hat. Yes, it was almost like, here, let me... No, I think he needs a much bigger one. Okay. Okay, let's... Okay. So we can do that. Now the question is how, let me look at the straw hat texture. It's like, I wonder if I have a texture roller that's, I think I do have one I can use. Here, let's lay him sideways so he doesn't get damaged. I want my phone. Ah, here's the one I want. Put my phone back. And it's not as defined as I should like, but I think it's sufficient. I don't know if you can see the texture. I think it's sufficient for this. There we go. Let's lay him sideways. Okay. And then we're going to put the middle piece of the hat on top here. The band around it, and then the ears have to come up through the sides. Alright, let me look up that hat design again. Okay, because I want to do it like that. And then almost like, not quite the fedora shape, but similar. Let's do that. Blend this into here. And we'll put some of the texture on the hat, and we'll add the band and the ears. Then we'll just have to add the hands and do the fur texture on the rest of his body. And then we'll be pretty much done. Alright. I do really love having texture rollers. I wish they were a tad more defined than they are. but they're very nice. They really make stuff like this considerably simpler. Okay, so there is his hat. Actually, I think I'm going to add a little to his head, the top of his head, just so that the hat perches higher and we can see his eyes. Because right now we can't see the eyes too well when we put the hat on, and I would like to be able to see the eyes a little better. So add this so that the head's a little larger forehead. Which I think I did make the forehead a bit too short, so this is fixing that problem. Although now it looks like he has a lump on his head. That's fine, because we're going to stick the hat like so. Okay. Okay. Here we go. And we can't forget about his spectacles. I have a feeling I'm gonna forget those, and I don't want to. Okay, so we're gonna pull the edges of the hat down a tad, pull the brim up here, so that we can do the ears next. All right. We're going to stick. Wow, that ear is way too big. All right. There we go. There's too much clay here. All right. So this is what we have so far for Mr. Perez. All right. So now we are going to go ahead and do his glasses. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Okay. There we go. Now he has glasses. Last thing is we got to do his hands, and then we'll touch up the textures that we've done. All right. So divide this piece of clay into two. And then, oh, my tooth is here. All right. So then we take do this. Oops. All right. And this last one here. And then we will be done. And this one, we're going to make the individual fingers, but then we kind of have to push them back together because it's going to have to hold my tooth. So. Okay, let's Smooth the fingers up a little bit. Even them up. I didn't make the elbows quite right. I gotta fix that. There we go. Okay. There we go. He's got his straw hat, his glasses, the two main things that were in the description. He's got my tooth in his hand. He's got a little vest. Alright, so now we're gonna do the fur patterns. Do I have my cheat one? Hmm. Okay. So here we have our little Mr. Ratoncito Perez, or Raton Perez, depending on which book we're looking at. You can see his little face. He's got his straw hat, his big ears. He's got my tooth in his hand. He's got little pants. But yeah, I think we're pretty much done with this one today. I'm gonna bake him and try to keep him from falling over, because he is definitely at risk for doing that. But if you like this video, please comment, let me know. Go check out the poll that I just posted so that you can have input on what my next animal sculpture is going to be. I apologize, I'm a little bit more soft-spoken today. My mouth is a little bit sore still. Not terribly, but a little bit sore from losing that tooth. But yeah, if you like this, please let me know. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful night.